Can you hear us, Brent?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you get, mics are on?
An email.
Right.
Figure out what's going on with my speakers. I apologize.
All right, so we have 2 work session items tonight, just for the council. Just so you know, the meeting is being recorded, it's live on YouTube. In the old days, our work sessions weren't, so just wanted you to know that. So our first item is the 9th Street queuing lengths, and then we're going to hear from Brad Posenjack regarding financial impacts from COVID. So I'll turn it over to Jacob, and we'll start talking about the 9th Street queuing.
Okay, so Jacob Heiler, Engineering Services Manager, and with me tonight is Ryan Harmon, our Project Engineer. We also have Brent Powell and Mike Hendricks from Proceedings on Teams, which we'll turn around here for a minute. Ryan's managing the project, like I said, so he's going to kind of kick us off and give some background on how we got to here, and then we'll let Mike and Brent take it from there.
Perfect.
All right.
All right, Ryan, it's all yours.
Thank you. Well, this all came to be when working on a grant application through the WashDOT HSIP grant application, the city safety program. Through it, we discovered that there were a number of pedestrian and vehicle collisions on 9th Street. And then while further diving into it, we noticed that it's also located on the Wenatchee Valley Bike Master Plan as a priority project. It's a supporting freight system route in the Wenatchee Valley Urbanized Area Freight Study. And then it's a major destination and employment density area in the Human Services Transportation Plan, that being generated mostly by Confluence Health. And so it being a corridor with lots of different interests, we wanted to go after a grant application to have a consultant come through and do a study and come out with the best alternatives to use. And so we've been working with Proceedings on examining the existing conditions and putting together alternatives, and their preferred and our preferred alternative is what they'll be going over today. And Mike, can you hear us? I'll delay just a little bit longer while we're getting this figured out.
Technology.
Yes, technology. It's been really nice. I know that it's a little different right now trying to broadcast through this.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, you're there. A little delayed, but we can hear you.
I can now hear you. My apologies about that.
Well, awesome. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mike with Proceedings.
Like I said, Mike, I'm going to turn you around here so you can kind of face the council, and if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, it's...
We can
on our
see them down
screens here
below.
as well.
They're on the lower ones.
Okay, but yeah, I just want him to be able to...
Okay. Oh, to have him see us.
Yep.
We're here.
Great.
I don't see myself. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
It's delayed.
Wonderful. So should I share my screen at this point?
Yes, please.
Wonderful. Okay. Can you all see that now?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Should I begin or?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Thank you all for being here tonight. Appreciate the time to go ahead and share with you what we've been working on with the public works staff regarding the 9th Street planning study. My name is Mike Hendricks. I am the project manager for Proceedings on this project. I've also brought with me today Brent Powell, who is our lead engineer on this project, and so he'll be available to answer any technical questions about the analysis and the concept design that we came up for this corridor. So as we process through the presentation, please feel free to stop and ask questions as you'd like. If you'd like to also go ahead and wait until the end, that's fine as well. So let's go ahead and start. Okay. So we have here the limits of the study on 9th Street ranging between North Miller Street and the BNSF Railway on the east side. Our goals of this project were to go ahead and evaluate potential roadway cross sections and how to enhance pedestrian and bicycle safety, since this corridor is on the bicycle plan, but also to go ahead and provide an efficient corridor for local business access and freight movements, because this corridor is also on the freight master plan as well. So it's critical that we balance the many competing needs of this corridor in an appropriate manner. To do that, we have about a study process. We have completed the evaluation and draft recommendations, which we'll be sharing with you today, which included reviewing the existing conditions, developing a number of alternatives, conducting the traffic analysis using industry standard tools, also developing draft recommendations, and then conducting a cost estimate analysis of those recommendations. The next step here is public outreach, and this is the first step in that process of briefing you on the status of the project and the ultimate results at this point. Following this, we'll have an online open house so that the community at large can go ahead and comment on this section, on this report, and provide that feedback to us. And finally, with that outreach completed, we'll go ahead and finalize the report along with the recommendations. We've already begun the conversation with Jacob and Ryan to go ahead and incorporate a number of their initial comments on the draft recommendations and the analysis, and that will be reflected in that final report. So currently, 9th is a 4-lane roadway, 2 lanes each direction in the eastbound and westbound directions. There are no dedicated turn lanes, either right turn lanes or left turn lanes throughout this corridor. And the curb width varies between 40 feet and 46 feet, which is typical to a corridor like this. As you know, there are no bicycle facilities on the roadway. There are sidewalks on both sides, but they're right against the curb, which may not make it a pleasant area to walk. And developments are right abutting the back of curb, so there's not a lot of landscaping or differences between the back of the sidewalk and private property. So to begin this process on our analysis, we go ahead and we collect turning movement counts both in the morning and the afternoon peak hours. I want to go ahead and make a note here that this was prior to the COVID outbreak and all the related quarantine and stay-at-home orders. So these should be what you would normally expect to see on the roadways. In addition, this was during school time as well, so just a normal day. We also collected motor vehicle speeds on the corridor. This was done over a 24-hour period, and we found that the speeds were consistent with the speed limit along the corridor. And we also collected a 5-year crash history. Again, this is standard traffic engineering practice, and that ran from January 1st, 2015 through December 31st of 2019. So we were able to go ahead and see if there were any patterns on this for this corridor. So here's a graphic way to go ahead and represent how we approach it with our traffic analysis. First off is our safety analysis, where we look at segment and intersection crashes, and this is to determine if there are any patterns or any anomalies which should be addressed in an approach, in a new design on this. Then we go ahead and look at an operations analysis, and these are using standards level of service tools, which is a standard practice as well. It's oftentimes abbreviated as LOS. And for bicycles and pedestrians, we are using what's called a level of traffic stress. This is the measurement is intended to go ahead and numerically show how a bicyclist or pedestrian may be feeling on the corridor, and as such may choose to walk on the corridor or bicycle along the corridor. If they feel a lot more stress, likely not to go ahead and do that. And we'll go ahead and talk about all of these later in the presentation. Here's a summary of the crash history through the corridor. What we have here is a graph showing the 5 major intersections on the corridor from Miller to Wenatchee Ave, along with the number of injury crashes and non-injury crashes. You can see that on this corridor there are a pretty good amount of collisions. However, what we do, because this occurred over a 5-year period, and the number of volumes of traffic which go through each intersection vary, we normalize these rates using the intersection crash rate, and that's shown on the lower graph. As you could see, with the exception of Emerson, all the other intersections are under 1 collision per million entering vehicles. And what this shows is that, relatively speaking, these intersections are operating safely and efficiently. So when we look at the collisions on a segment base, we notice that the crash numbers are low, and so there really weren't any patterns that we found in that data. Now, while the signalized crash counts have not reached a critical level, as you could see, we did notice that there were 2 types of crashes which were prevalent in the data. One was left turn crashes at Miller. What was happening there is that we noticed there's a lot of eastbound and westbound left turn vehicles which are being struck by through vehicles at that collision, at that intersection. Then we also noticed along the corridor that there were a number of angle crashes where, for example, a vehicle had disregarded the traffic signal red indication and had come through the intersection and been struck by a vehicle at an angle. This is a relatively rare occurrence for a signalized intersection, so we wanted to go ahead and look a little bit deeper into that, and we have some recommendations on how to address both of those factors. On this, we want to go ahead and also talk about that there were 2 pedestrian crashes at Mission Street, and then also 2 crashes at Chelan Avenue. And so you can see here the dates of when those occurred. So when we talk about operations, we first go ahead and we look at the intersection level of service. And what this is it shows, it gives a grade, essentially, of the level of service ranging from A to F. And that's measured by the average control delay of vehicles through the corridor or at the intersection. Just as a reminder, the Wenatchee standard is level of service E per the comp plan here. So we want to make sure that any improvements that we propose or recommendations are at least at level of service E or better to meet that comp plan requirement. We had mentioned about the level of traffic stress on how to measure this for pedestrians and people riding bikes. This is a relatively new concept which has come in, but has been used in the past years. What's been happening is that this allows a numerical value to represent how a bicyclist or pedestrian may be feeling when they're on a roadway. So you can see here that on LTS4, that it's a very high stress location for someone to be riding a bike. So typically you'd see that in high volume roadways without bike lanes. If someone was riding a bike on Chelan or Mission, that would be an example of an LTS4 facility. Likewise, because those are very high stress, you're likely not to see a lot of families or commuters really using that road. What you're likely to see are people who are very confident in their riding skills, probably those folks who like to race bicycles as well. And so as we proceed through to a level of traffic stress 1, LTS 1, what we see is parents and kids use these facilities, and in general, a more comfortable roadway for everyone, even including that person who's very confident in the roadway. It's a very comfortable road. And a good example of these are separated bike lanes like such on the First Street project coming up. And as also another example would be a shared use path like the Apple Capitol Trail along the river. Similar is for pedestrian level of traffic stress as well, which uses a similar factor where if you're walking on a corridor, things such as trees which separate you from the roadway or a planting strip really help provide a level of traffic stress low for people who are walking as well. So when we looked at the alternatives, we first developed a cross-section alternative. And this was kind of simple. We looked at a 4-lane cross-section, which is what we have today. But we also looked at a 3-lane cross-section where we used 1 lane in each direction, but we also had a center 2-way left turn lane for between intersections and an exclusive left turn lane at the intersections itself. With the extra space that we had, we allocated that to bike lanes, just a conventional bike lane. Now, at each intersection, at the signalized intersections, we looked at 3 different alternatives for, or rather, we looked at different alternatives for how to control the left turn movement. We have permissive, which is what's there today, whereby when a person is taking a left turn, they look for a break in the opposing direction of traffic and make the turn. Then another one was a protected permissive indication. And this is where you've got a vehicle waiting for either a green arrow or, and when that green arrow is ended, could turn left on a flashing yellow arrow, similar to the permissive indication as well. And then we also looked at what's called split phasing. And this is when one of the directions, say the eastbound direction, would go completely, and then it would stop, and then the westbound direction would go. This is similar to US 2 in Leavenworth at Front Street, for example. Challenge with these is that they're typically very inefficient. However, they do work in some limited circumstances. So now, here's a table of our results of our alternative analysis. We, of course, look at the existing, but then we went ahead and compared it to 4 alternatives. The top 2, option A and B, were both on the 3-lane corridor, which allowed us to go ahead and have permissive left turn phasing. But because of the addition of the left turn lane, it also allowed us to do a protected permissive left turn phasing as well. With the 4-lane option, we also looked at a protected permissive left turn phasing option as well. It was a different, unique one because of the left turn operations. And then we also looked at alternative D, which was the 4-lane section, but also looking at split phasing it so that one direction would go at a time. What you can see here is that the existing operation is actually very well. They range from a level of service A to B in the morning, and all of the then in the afternoon, all the intersections operated at B. The worst performing out of these alternatives was the 4-lane split phasing, which is somewhat to be expected because of the inefficiency. We also looked at the queue lengths to make sure that if we reduce a lane, that the left turn for, say, Chelan would not impact the left-turning vehicles waiting to turn on Mission as well. So we didn't want those to overlap or extend beyond the block because of the signalized intersections at the ends of those. We also looked at the level of traffic stress, as we've talked about. Currently, it's level of traffic stress 3 for bicyclists and 4 for pedestrians. In all of the options, with the exception of the 4-lane, they also improved one number in the case of the bicyclists because of the addition of the bike lane, and then increased from 4 to 2, or rather decreased in stress from 4 to 2 for the pedestrians, mostly because it provided a separation between moving traffic in that case. So our recommendation is to go with a 3-lane with permissive left turn phasing because it met a number of the goals with minimal impacts. And so I'll briefly go ahead and walk through our recommendation in a graphic form. As we mentioned before, seeing that there were a number of angle collisions at intersections, what we found is that those collisions occurred primarily when in the PM peak times, which matches when the sun may be lower on the horizon. And so what could happen is that when you only have traffic signal indications overhead, it's difficult to see them in the sun. And so people may be not seeing those indications and entering the intersection. So we recommend to put supplemental signal heads on the pole shaft slightly lower. And what that will do is that will help increase visibility. And in addition, it will actually increase visibility if a vehicle is behind a high-profile vehicle, such as a truck or a delivery van, that they can see it. In addition, throughout the corridor, using retro-reflective backplates on the signal heads. These are the yellow outlines of the traffic signals, increases visibility both during the day and the night, and it has proven to be a very cost-effective safety treatment. So through the corridor, at 9th Street and Miller, we recommend to go ahead and add protected and permissive left turn phasing to address that left turn collision issue that we had talked about earlier. Also, because of the collision rates that were happening at Emerson, is to go ahead and look at do not block intersection markings, which are the hatch markings shown here, but also with associated signing as well on that one here. By reducing the number of lanes, we expect that the vehicles that will be able to, will now be able to have more of a clear view throughout the intersection and reduce that collision rate. And then also wanted to mention specifically at the North Chelan Avenue intersection of installing a leading pedestrian interval. These are when a pedestrian gets a 3-second to 5-second head start in the intersection. So for example, traffic on Chelan would stop, but then the pedestrian would get the green, would get the walk indication for 3 seconds at a minimum to let them get into the intersection before 9th Street actually got a green light. And so what this does is it gets them into the intersection so they're more visible. This was especially important here at Chelan because when we did our traffic counts, we noticed that the crosswalk on the south leg, which is leading to Confluence Health, had over 60 pedestrians using that crosswalk during the morning peak. And that was by far the highest volume throughout the entire corridor. And so. And then, so for the next section here, very similar recommendations as well for the supplemental signal heads and backplates. Also similar to Chelan, we recommend a leading pedestrian interval for the crosswalks on Mission Street as well. Again, to go ahead and get those pedestrians out into the intersection and more visible to turning traffic. One thing I wanted to go ahead and mention here, the Mission Street analysis, when we looked at it from a queuing perspective, we noticed that in the 2030 to 2035 period, the queues start to go ahead and overlap each other. And so one way to address that is to take that signal out of coordination on Mission Street. And by doing that, it would allow the signal to operate more freely. Because this intersection is at the end of a coordinated system, we don't expect that to have substantial impacts on the remaining part of Mission further to the south of 9th. And then the final item at Wenatchee Avenue is to have protected permissive left turn phasing for 9th as well. So that would help increase the overall safety and efficiency. So we did the cost estimates for this design. And so a full cost design, including design, construction engineering, would be just under $860,000, $859,000. This includes signal upgrades specifically at the big chunk at Miller Avenue to accommodate those new signal heads, and associated curb ramp replacements, which would be coming with them. However, we also did look at how could we go ahead and reduce these costs as much as possible to go ahead and make this a shovel-ready project. We were able to look at that, reducing it to by over half to $381,000. It would include signal upgrades, but without the pole replacement, so it would be using some different signal indications, but would still be compliant with federal regulations and driver expectations. And then both of these, it would also include revised channelization as shown in the recommendations. I want to go ahead and make a mention, though, that there are the improvements such as the leading pedestrian intervals, which could be implemented very quickly and efficiently at a low cost, probably in the range of about $10,000 to $15,000 to do that. So with that, that concludes the presentation.
Thanks, Mike. To kind of put a bow on that and a Spark Notes version of it, you know, we wanted to, as Mike mentioned, that corridor is sought after by many of the different plans that that we have between the bike plan, the freight plan, and not all of those necessarily correlate overly well with each other. You know, freight doesn't care as much about bikes as it's just the nature of it. And so we wanted to take kind of a holistic look at 9th Street from Miller down to the tracks and say what works and what doesn't. What, you know, where's the balance? And with protected left turns, obviously that's the best thing for pedestrians, but because of how short those blocks are between Chelan and Mission and the Avenue, those are things we don't want to stack up traffic on 9th into Mission if they're waiting to turn on Chelan. And so that's, you know, to really try to figure out what the best alternative would be here. That's why we kind of went down this road. And so through
We
there,
don't think we'll have any queuing issues on 9th Street between Mission and Chelan or Wenatchee Avenue and Mission, those sort of short blocks?
so that was the one piece that Mike mentioned there towards the end between
Right.
between Chelan and Mission. No, through 2040, which is a typical 20-year design period, things work out well.
Okay.
On 9th, if you are going westbound on 9th, waiting at Mission,
Right.
Mike said, you know, in the 2030 to 2035 timeframe, that's when traffic could queue up into the avenue.
Got it. Okay.
And so that's where, in order to mitigate that, that could mean taking that signal out of coordination with
Okay.
everything on Mission south of 9th.
Got it.
We get queuing issues there now. And somehow we're going to get things through there better by reducing it down to one lane each direction for traffic. And I'm questioning the absolute need for a turn lane in there. I don't, especially right now with there not being a business at Hastings, I don't know how much traffic is turning,
Well,
heading west, turning into
So the
Hastings.
Confluence Health people will tell you the most dangerous thing, and I think our staff will tell you, is crossing the street from Hastings going to Confluence Health for their employees that are working there.
For pedestrians,
Yes,
agreed.
yeah. And so I think the idea of having a queued lane that you can control so people can turn left if you're heading west, right? That makes it safer, and you'll be able to get way more traffic through there, because right now you got to wait, and 2 cars go. If you queue it and give it a full left turn, you can run 15 cars through there in one shot. And
I'm not disagreeing with that. It's the actual turn lane, the entire block.
it wouldn't be
which
the
is
entire
reducing-
block, but it would be most of the block, I'm guessing.
Isn't
Yeah.
that what we looked at on the drawing just now?
It would basically be split. So if you're looking at the Mission to the Ave, or Mission to Chelan section, part of it would be
That's right there.
Yeah, there's 2 lanes going, one will turn left, one will go straight.
No, that's Wenatchee Avenue.
So,
Mike, could you go to maybe the slide before that? I
drive that a lot.
well, even this one, I mean, you've got the dedicated turn there.
You've got half the road there between Mission and Chelan.
Yeah, I mean, so this is Hastings right here, correct?
No,
this is Hastings.
yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, so to have a light that queues and you can run 20 cars through there, it's got to be way better for traffic.
And
And for
that's-
folks continuing westbound.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, get in the right lane and you can go westbound.
yep. Don't have to worry
You're
about it.
not clogging up, or you're not frustrated. This is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the people turning left to go south on Chelan.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Keith. Some
But
of
they
this
don't turn on their blinker until the
a
light
little
turns.
counterintuitive.
I
to
admit
take-
After a while.
I
Or
looked at
not.
it wrong. I was thinking this and then there, but it's not, so.
So it seems to me like the places where we have the most congestion, there's really 2 lanes, and one of the lanes is a through lane and one is a left, or turn-only lane that you can queue and run the traffic through.
And
So that
just
seems to make the most sense, yeah.
one thing I do want to make sure that everybody's understanding is it wouldn't be a protected left turn lane that we're talking about here. So they ran that analysis
Okay,
and it came out that the signal performed poorer than it currently does.
okay.
And so it would still be a permissive left turn, but because they have a dedicated space to wait for that, and you don't have, like you were saying, the frustration of how do I get around this person as I'm trying to continue going?
So it may not be queued with a light, but it's a dedicated,
Right, it's a
So you have to
dedicated
wait, but-
space for them.
Okay.
And
And
then
there's what, about 4 cars in there?
I'd have to go measure it.
That room for about 4 cars?
yeah, probably, yeah, 6.
Yeah. It looks small there, but it's pretty, yeah. I'd
Oh,
say
look
more
at the
than
car,
4.
look at your cars in the parking lot.
Yeah, no.
Here on the domestic turn, how is that different than what it is now?
So that's where it's a little bit counterintuitive. So sometimes people think that, having 4 lanes with different, 4 lanes is better than 3. That's the logical thought, right? But it's the dedicated space for particular movements that makes the big difference. And so
You still have to wait. If you're in that left turn lane, you're sitting there waiting for a gap in the traffic to make a turn, right?
correct. Yep. But
I don't see what the advantage, how is that better?
So,
Because you don't
Right now,
have
you have to sit
other,
there and wait for everybody to clear? Or
No,
you
because-
have to sit there and wait till everybody clears.
right,
So it's the same as far as I can see.
from a vehicle turning left, yes, you're correct, it's the same. What you don't have is somebody that's waiting to continue straight on 9th, waiting for that person in the left turn lane to turn left.
And we
Or
do
in
get a
the-
lot of people that realize, oh, I'm in the left lane and I'm going to be sitting here for a while, so then they try and dart out into the right lane, and I'm sure that's a good source of the accidents right there.
Yeah, Jacob, if I could also go ahead and kind of further elaborate on that. A lot of times, as you've identified, there are sometimes the psychological effects of people in that left lane, if through traffic can continue behind them, of maybe taking gaps which are not, pushing a gap between vehicles that maybe was too small. And oftentimes in those locations, what happens is that people who are crossing are kind of the last people that a driver may see just before. So by having a dedicated left turn lane, it does allow a driver to not feel as pressured to take that maneuver if there's a big queue behind them, necessarily, providing additional safety of the intersection. And as you had mentioned, and I'm sorry I didn't catch the council member, it also will reduce the amount of vehicles, maybe making that last minute change lanes from a left lane into a right lane, and reducing the chance of side swipe collisions as well.
So when we first started looking at this, I thought for sure that a protected left turn would be the logical solution to.
So explain to me how it's better for pedestrians.
So that's where we've got the leading pedestrian interval. So our goal is to make pedestrians as visible as possible. So if we have the pedestrian signal turn white, the walk signal, 3 to 5 seconds prior to the green light for the vehicles, they're already, 3 to 5 seconds worth out into the road where they're easier to see. And so
there'll be 3 or 4 seconds where it's red for everybody, no one's going, and it's white for the pedestrians to get started, and they're halfway in the intersection, and then those that are turning are gonna see them better.
right. And so that's again where we're trying to find this balance between, the best thing for pedestrians is going to have protected left turns, because you can't have a left turning vehicle when the pedestrian's in the crosswalk. The best thing for, vehicles is, based on the traffic analysis, is not that. And so we're trying to find how do we make the signals operate, more or less equivalent to how they do now and still improve safety on the corridor.
Now, on the recommendation are there bike lanes?
There are. Yep.
That's the thing. I mean, even with the bike lane, to me, it'd be certifiably nuts to be on a bike on that nice straight section in there.
Right now, I agree. And our goal is to
Well,
not have that
I
long
don't
term.
think much is going to change if you have that left, or that right lane is going to be a through lane, and you're competing with trucks and a lot of heavy traffic. That's a decidedly, in my opinion, you're more the expert than I am. It's been a long time since I've ridden a bike in traffic for obvious reasons.
I think the
But-
intersection at Emerson is going to be even worse, because now you're going to get cars stopping there, but bicycles not necessarily stopping there.
Yeah.
If you don't force them to stop there, now you're going to get somebody zipping across there to Emerson.
Yeah, that
We've
mixing of a
talked
bike.
about closing that little Emerson Street off a number of times. I mean, somebody's actually talked about buying that property out and converting it to something
And we talked about right out only
right
at
out
that
there.
intersection.
I mean, if we're really looking at safety, that's a really dangerous little section.
When you have a freight corridor and a bike corridor, it's just.
Yeah, when they said that, I was going, yeah, one's gonna win, one's gonna lose that one.
Yes, which one?
I realize we
Pretty
need
obvious
to
which one's going to lose.
move on, but I had of the signalization, I had in my mind here how the same system on Chelan at Fifth westbound, how that signal allows traffic going westbound and or turning south onto Chelan before the eastbound Fifth Street goes.
Right.
Is that?
So that's another thing they looked at. They looked at protected permissive, and so that's.
That's the other,
Yeah.
that was the other,
Yeah.
okay.
And in all those cases, it didn't perform as well as
Yeah.
sticking with a permissive.
Yeah, I would just say, the 3 to 5 seconds for PEDs to go first, I think is great. Watch drivers in this town, though, they're always looking to the right when they're turning left. They don't, that's how people get crunched, and so,
But it's also putting them out there for the people that are running that red light.
yeah. And then, what was it up in Canada that you often see pedestrians are held while traffic, it's the opposite. Traffic goes and pedestrians are held, and then pedestrians start, so those turning movements are made.
Sure.
And then the PEDs go. I think they made I think a really good point about sidewalks next to 30 mile an hour, 35 mile an hour, 40 mile an hour arterials just doesn't cut it. And I realize it's in the WashDOT design manual. It doesn't cut it.
No.
There's no confidence that you're safe on those sidewalks at, what do we build, 5-foot wide sidewalks?
And I completely agree. That's where they go back to this level of traffic stress. So when you are abutted to a travel lane at 35 miles an hour, walking on North Wenatchee Avenue, it's uncomfortable. So,
Well, actually, Western, even with the bike lane, it is, well, and then of course with COVID, you can't get two people there, and it's really uncomfortable walking on Western. Really uncomfortable.
I'm sort of surprised that there's not a design strategy, or maybe you told them not to, where we didn't have to acquire any right of way.
Yeah.
So the goal was stick within the current right of way, which is why it's only $1 million or less than that. Because I was thinking 5 and 10 million, and I was thinking we're acquiring right of way to help either with the pedestrian movements or wider sidewalks or tree planting, something to sort of, I don't know, soften the blow a little bit. So, yeah, if it works within the right of way for less than $1 million, are there grants for stuff like this, or is this all stuff that we have to eat?
Nope, there certainly are. So a pedestrian and bicycle program would be a great candidate for a project like this because you're enhancing the corridor for head and bikes. Yeah, HSIP, if it's a safety issue, which obviously we have a collision history, that's an opportunity. So there are some opportunities here. The other nice part is you can kind of go à la carte, like Mike was saying at the very end with, maybe we implement leading pedestrian intervals now, and maybe then we can get to doing some of these other safety improvements. So we've got some options, whether we want to do things kind of piecemeal, whether we want to, go all in on $1 million grant application. So, but big picture, before we start trying to do some of these piecemeal things, we want to make sure that that you guys are obviously informed on kind of what we're looking at. And as Mike said, we'll be putting this out for a virtual open house to solicit some feedback from the public folks along the 9th Street corridor. So, but we don't want to continue down a path that's not supported. So.
Okay.
Have there been looks at the trailing pedestrian instead of leading pedestrian?
No, not to my knowledge.
I would be interested in looking at that a little bit, because I kind of agree with Kua. You get red light runners, you're putting that pedestrian out in front of a red light runner almost immediately. And if the pedestrians are busy on their phone, they're not going to see that red light runner.
I think the pedestrians there are probably some of the more alert ones in the city because it is,
Oh, no, they
it
are
is a
not.
hazard there. I would hate to be
They're all
crossing
on
that
their
street.
phones.
I think the chief of police said he would never cross that intersection. He would walk up,
I would go north.
yep, and then turn
And
around.
then back. I'd go
Yep.
3 crosswalks. There's no way,
Yeah, absolutely.
no.
All right, well, thanks to the team that called in on Microsoft Teams, and you guys keep plugging away at this and come back with some recommendations.
Yeah, so at this point, like I said, going forward, we'll open it up to a virtual open house if there's, and then they'll go through and finalize the report. And so their recommendation is this 3-lane section with permissive turning.
Okay.
But obviously we want the report to include council feedback if that's not something you're.
And
supportive of.
Confluence Health feedback as well.
Right, yep.
Perfect. All right, thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Can we get the images and the presentation that they sent us to us, please? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Brent.
Thank you so much for your time. Good evening.
The reason I asked about grants is because we don't have any money, right, Brad?
That's Brad's turn.
Yeah.
Here comes the bad news.
Hey, there's the Gonzaga K. Match my mask.
Who's the Gonzaga guy? Is that you? Yeah. And you left it on the screen for us, right?
Look at that, yeah.
Get it back up.
At least there's no Cougars.
Okay.
Well, it's still signing out, so.
There we go. There's a familiar logo.
I don't think I'll be able to get this done in 6 minutes, so I might go
You're
over a lot of time. Good evening. Yes. I believe so. I'm pretty sure I've done it at a finance committee at some point. But why? Taking a long time for me to log in. It's welcoming me, but nothing's happening. or would it be easier to log in with the council?
Just depends if your airtime sessions are saved already in your.
Is that, yeah, oh, that's, that in here? Oh, okay, well then, me asking that question isn't gonna help. Oh. This is not going so fast. Uh-huh. Searching. Oh, perfect.
Well, you're not going to use up your time very well if we're going to stare at a screen.
That's right.
Yeah.
Jesse's gonna save it. Oh, did I have to do something? Did I kill it?
It always happens that way, right, Brad?
That's right. Oh, I see. There you go. Perfect.
Da-dun, da-dun.
All right. So then, let me just pull
There
this
we
up.
are.
Can get there. All right. So, good evening, Mayor, Council. I'm Brad Pozajak, Finance Director. Tonight, we get to touch on financial impacts from the COVID stuff that's been kind of wreaking a little bit of havoc on our economy. So to start off, this first slide is to provide a little bit of context of for the rest of the budget discussion. Over the past 5 years, we've witnessed revenue growth. Our general fund has grown every year for the last 5 years, and actually, I think even a few years before that. You can, come on, there. You can see that the way our budget, so these are our budgets, the way we budgeted for the last 5 years. By policy, we have to budget so that we basically break even, that our expenses don't exceed our recurring revenues. And so we've done that. What ends up happening, pretty much, is what we're used to, is that when it actually plays out, our revenues come in greater and our expenses come in under budget, because we have to do that legally. So then what ends up happening is, in a normal year, we end up with about 104% of our revenue budget and only about 96% of our expense budget. So this is a normal year, and a spoiler alert, 2020 is not going to be a normal year. So we have been looking at our revenues pretty closely and watching several different revenues for economic indicators. And I've got a sampling of some of these that are going to have larger impacts. Not every one of our revenues are going to be impacted by our economic recession, crisis, whatever we want to call it at this point. Sales tax, you've all been getting sales tax reports monthly. So far, the latest month we've seen is April. We'll be getting May's in a few days here. April was fully shut down mode, and it was down 24%. Our sales tax was down 24%. We're assuming May is going to be similar. We're hoping June is a little bit better, a little less than 24%, because things started opening back up again. People were out doing things whether they were supposed to or not. And so then we hope July and August, September get progressively better. I guess I'm an optimist, and so I'm hoping that it gets better until we probably won't see 100% by the end of the year, but I'm hoping we get closer to that. So if that kind of curve happens for the rest of the year, then sales tax, our annual sales tax would be down around 14, 15%. So sales tax, that's a big hit, but not as bad as it could be if things turn back down. Hotel motel tax, that's the big one that's getting hit hard. We saw in April, for the month of April, hotel motel tax was down 65%. And we expect that to be the same story for May.
We had talked about it, thinking it would be down 90%.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
We literally thought that it would be down in that 90% range. So quite frankly, that it was only down 65. I thought we were really pleasantly surprised.
Definitely. It sounds like a lot of that was due to that there was still construction going on, and so contractors had to have a place for their employees to stay. Just hearing what is happening recently with hotel motel tax on the call with TPA the other day, yesterday, they said that the 4th of July weekend was huge, that the hotels were full, and last weekend was busy as well. So they still aren't back up to what they used to be, but I'm hoping that the few months where we were shut down is going to be short-lived. And so even though we were down 65% in April, I'm hoping that by the end of the year, that will equate to just a down 40% on the annual revenues. Real estate excise tax and motor vehicle, so hotel motel tax, I should step back, that is outside the general fund. Those fund tourism and the convention center, so there are some reductions that will have to be done. Nothing drastic there. Real estate excise tax, motor vehicle fuels tax, those are also outside of the general fund, and those go to mostly support streets. And real estate excise tax at the low that I saw in April was down 20%. It's not getting hit as hard as some of the other revenues. Motor vehicle fuels tax, I think because people weren't out driving, the lows were consistent in March and April. We were down 35% in March and April. Hopefully that will come back up, and then we will end the year around 19, 20% down. Utilities, we were a little concerned about utility revenue. When I looked at the water charges for commercial water charges, those have been down. I think the low I saw was still only about 8% down. We'll see how that continues. It may continue being down a little bit. Residential, interesting, was basically flat. It was actually a little bit up in certain months. And I think it's because everybody's staying home. And so they're doing yard work, watering their grass, and maybe they're consuming their water at home instead of at work. And so it's kind of a mixed bag. I don't think the utilities will be hit quite as hard, but I don't know. Rob may have, he may be seeing it different. And so when I take all of going back to just the general fund, when I project out a lot of the different revenues that we've got, what we think they'll end up for the end of the year, remember that 104% that was normal of our actual over budget. At this point, it's looking like we're going to be around 93%. Again, I'm a little bit more optimistic finance director than many. So that's a pretty big swing from what we're used to. So then what ends up happening is if that plays out for 2020, we end up with, instead of breaking even, and in the last 5 years, seeing growth, or general fund growth between $1 million and $3 million, now we're looking at a loss of around $900,000, which we are not used to.
So I do see $1 million reduction in expenditures on the one you're showing there, roughly speaking.
Yeah, so back on that previous slide, the normal is that we end up spending between 96 and 98% of our budget, just because we budget as if every position's filled, every initiative is paid for, and that just doesn't happen. And legally, we have to come in under budget. So we end up coming in under. So it is, I do think that because of just our hands have been tied on a lot of different programs that we've done, we are going to spend a little less than in most years. And so we probably will come in well under budget on the expenses, which does help. So So then, what does this mean for 2020 if we're going to end up losing 900,000 that we didn't expect to? So even that, fortunately, the city has had very strong reserves that have built up over the last 10 years. And so what we'll end up doing for 2020 is the general fund will be able to absorb that $900,000 loss. We'll still end up with a 22% reserve. We often throw around numbers. Our policy minimum is a 15% reserve. But however, we have been comfortable in the 30% reserve range for the last several years. So we're going to be down probably around the 22% reserve, which is still healthy. And that level of reserve is what's basically saving us through some of this. Like the general fund, most of our other funds also have some level of reserves and should be able to absorb the 2020 losses. But there are many of them that have large capital projects planned. We're going to have to kind of scrutinize a lot of those to see what that means for 2020. Maybe there's certain projects that don't go, especially for 2021. We're going to have to be looking at those in the future. Besides our reserves, we also have $1.5 million rainy day fund currently. And so it gives us enough, between the reserves and the rainy day fund, it gives us enough cushion that I'm not coming here saying we need to look at making layoffs, that we need to do furloughs. I'm not recommending that because we have strong reserves that have been built up for this purpose, for this time. If we didn't have these reserves, it would be panic mode. So one of the things
You see a lot of cities right now around our state in panic mode and around the country, laying off people and 10, 15% budget cuts and yeah.
Yep. In the same light, I would recommend that, and I think I've said it before, that we need to drag our feet when it comes to spending. We need to drag our feet when it comes to refilling positions if we can. I know there are many positions that we can't have open for very long, but there are some positions that we can get by for 6 months without refilling them. And I would recommend that we slow our spending as much as possible for 2020 without getting into the cuts. So then, what does this mean for 2021? So 2021, I'm expecting will probably be the most difficult budget that we've had in the last half dozen years. And it won't necessarily be difficult because we're going to have such a large deficit to fill. I think it's going to be difficult because we're coming off 5, 6, 7 years of growth. We've been able, every year we go to the budget table, we have been able to expand our services and enhance the services that we provide. I think that mindset is going to have to change for 2021. We may have to be okay taking a pause for 2021 and even 2022 on enhancing, and we may need to focus on just trying to stay where we're at. I know nobody wants to just stay where they're at, and there are always things that we can do to enhance our services without spending more money. But the enhancements that come at a cost may have to be tabled for a couple years. So as we begin building the 2021 budget, we've started putting some numbers together, taking a look at currently the CPI that historically we've based some of our cost of livings for employee salaries on. That CPI is less than 1% and it's about 0.5%. And I think it's going to hold right around 0.5%. It may go down to 0 because it's been dropping consistently the last few months. So I would, as I'm building the 2021 budget, I'm building it with basically no cost of living increases. Based on the CPI, I'm not sure there'd be a need for that. And as well as I'm not sure we can actually afford that for 2021. I'm also using somewhat optimistic revenue projections. I'm looking at when I project out where we're going to end up at 2020 with our revenues and then bring that into 2021. They're lining up, the economic-driven revenue sources are lining up with 2018's level of revenues. And I think some people might say we should go back further a few years to those revenues, but I am optimistic that as long as as long as things don't take another deep dive, then we should be all right as far as revenues go. Even with, as we're looking at the 2021 budget, what I'm seeing at this point early on is a deficit of over 800,000 that we're going to have to fill. And there are going to be a lot of adjustments, little tweaks up and down with several different budget items that we'll be looking at. But that's, it paints a picture of what we've got to look at for 2021. By policy, we need to make our recurring expenses match our recurring revenues. That's going to be difficult when we've got an $800,000 hole, and I am still not going to recommend any significant layoffs or any significant cuts to fill that hole would require layoffs, which again, I would not recommend when we've got a rainy day fund and we still have reserves in the general fund. So we may end up having to have more discussion on policy when it comes into the 2021 budget, that maybe there are times to make exceptions to our balancing our recurring budgets when we know that we are in a recession and when we have a plan to utilize some of these reserves to help us get out of it. So yeah, all that to say, 2020 and 2021 are going to be tough. But it's not dire.
Not yet anyway, right?
Not yet anyway. And again, we don't know what it's going to look like in 6 months from now. I'm hoping it's not going to be as doom and gloom as some
We
people
hope we
say.
don't get a shutdown again, right?
Yeah.
Which some of the other states are doing, and I think the governor is sort of threatening might happen again. So that would put another damper if we go back
Yep.
into full stay home, stay healthy, shut down everything, shut down the restaurants. But
My perception when the three of us were early in our council careers, that we were pushing at that time administration for the reserve fund.
right,
And it wasn't just to have it there should there be some financial catastrophic event, like City Hall collapsing or something like that. It was to be available for when we had an emergency of any nature.
Yep.
So, yeah, we need to have that conversation about that fund and maybe using some of it, and then also the strategy for recovering it over a certain
Yes.
period of years.
Yep, absolutely. And a lot of rainy day or reserve policies talk about being able to utilize those and then having a plan to replenish that within 2 years, 3 years, however many years you want to put on that. And so as long as we would sit down and have a plan that we're not, the goal is to not just spend your reserves to hire new positions
Right.
and then not have money to pay for them. That's what the goal is. And we're not looking at doing that. And yeah, absolutely.
And I think our policy says we're supposed to have $1 million in the rainy day fund, but when we got when we got out of the fire business and more of our revenue as a percentage of our gross was sales tax driven, we made a decision to put another $500,000 in there. So I think we're $500,000 over policy just for this instance when sales tax all of a sudden, which is half of our budget, takes a hit like this. So I wouldn't have any problem using $500,000 of that rainy day fund, because it was designed for this exact, again, I'm with Brad, you don't go out and build a new building with it, or you don't go out and hire a bunch of new employees, but I always thought it was 5 employees for 3 years. That was it cost us, roughly speaking, 100 to have with benefits and all that sort of stuff, and we were going to hire people if we couldn't keep them. So, but that probably is going to require some adjustment to our financial policy that says in instances of COVID-19 pandemic, you can use the rainy day fund to balance the budget, which probably was inferred back then, just probably wasn't written.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And I wasn't here back then, but the policy and the rainy day fund were established right after the 08-09 recession,
Yeah.
I believe. And I think there was a mentality of wanting to make sure that rainy day fund was built and protected.
Yeah.
So I think that's why our policies are pretty tight
And,
around.
and we wanted to let our constituents know what our policies were with their tax dollars.
Yeah.
We wanted it reduced to writing, because to that point, it was, hey, what do you think? And let's just kind of do this. And I know a lot of people don't like things reduced to writing because, my gosh, it's a plan and a strategy, and you might have to follow it. I think it's served us well,
has.
having that.
Absolutely.
Because prior to that, we balanced our budget over a 2-year period on the construction of the hospital, right? $120 million hospital, actually $1.2 million in tax as the economy was starting to slow, and that money just covered your operational expenses, right? Now with our policy, that would go into the non-reoccurring, and we could decide what to do with it. And so it really has served us well in terms of making sure we understand what's going on and how we look at, I'm trying to tell Brad that I think it's $5 million projects he puts in the non-reoccurring.
Yeah.
I keep telling him it needs to be 10, and he keeps telling me it needs to be 5. So we have this argument back and forth. But again, it serves us well to have the discussion, right? Make sure we're sort of getting things in the right buckets.
Yep. Yep.
Well, thanks for doing that. And again, I think this is subject to change if the governor tries to slow us down much anymore. And I think it'll be interesting. Listen, May will be just like April. June will be the one that I want to see as we've sort of started to open things up a little bit to see what does that mean to us in terms of sales tax.
Yep.
We still have a number of sales tax generators that are not open, right? The movie theater is a big one, and others that are not getting back to full throttle yet, and are going to be a while.
Yeah. Certainly looks that way.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing that, Brad. Any questions? And the Finance Committee, again, continues to talk about this, and I just sort of wanted all the council members to see it as we start our budget process really here in the next month or so.
Yep.
Is there any updates on the money that we were going to get for
CARES?
COVID? Yeah.
So Brad did the application, they approved it. The money is not here yet, but it's been approved for the $700,000.
Yeah, so the first 700,000 is, we've been able to document related to payroll leave, paid leave that we have provided to staff. And so we submitted that one. It was the cleanest, easiest to document. So we submitted that. It was approved just a couple days ago, and they say it should take a week or two to get the funds deposited. So hopefully that will be coming soon. Then we've got, at this point, I think from what I'm hearing is we probably have about 100,000 of other city costs that are reimbursable costs, and those will probably continue. But if we'll still have money left over to be able to do other initiatives with that if we want.
Well, we talked about possibly generating a plan where we could use some of that money to help out our small businesses locally to keep them propped up, because if we can keep them alive, that's going to come back to us in the end.
And Laura and I just went through, the Chelan County is through, I don't know what the $900,000 or $1 million into that pot for the port. And Laura and I went through and made some recommendations to the port for some of that money to go to local city businesses. So the county was nice enough to say this money should go countywide, not just the unincorporated stuff. Right. So there was, if once they get to getting that, there'll be another 18, 20, 25 businesses that will get money. So we're trying to spread it out and get as much of that out there as possible. And again, whether the city does more on top of that is, again, if we have another shutdown, we'll be glad that we still got some money in our pocket to maybe help with some.
Okay.
So next week's regular meeting, I think the agenda was out today, so or you're going to get it today or sometime. So looks like it's should be fairly reasonable. And anything else for the good of the order? All right, we're sort of adjourned.
The camera's ready.
Yeah.